Y ahora, sin más dilaciones, el compañero y amigo Cory Doctorow, que es un histórico de la libertad en Internet, que siempre tiene unos vaticinios de cómo, y en positivo, de cómo podemos actuar en la actual situación, hará la conferència conclusiva para que le hemos llamado la lluita que tenim per davant. I després, no sé ja si parlava en català o en castellà. Català? Estava parlant en català? No, bueno, da igual. En castellà, no? Bueno, da igual. Ara en català. I després ja tenim ahí birra i més empanades i començarem el joc de l'internet. Per la qual cosa, si podeu projectar el company Cory Doctorow, que és aquí, el tenim. És un amic admirat, un escriptor, un activista, és un periodista canadenc-britànic que és reconegut per els seus llibres de ciència-ficció, però també per fer unes anàlisis molt lúcida de la llibertat d'internet, dels problemes que tenim per tenir un internet lliure i just. I estem molt contents de tenir-lo avui aquí perquè ens il·lumini en la lluita que tenim per davant. Very happy to have you here, Cory, as always, and the floor is yours.
Muchísimas gracias, Simona, y gracias a todos. Lo siento mucho que no podría hacer esa presentación en español, pero ustedes pueden oír que mi español es atroz, entonces yo voy a cambiar al inglés ahora. So Donald Trump is a very dark cloud, but he offers quite a strange silver lining. The Donald Trump silver lining, it's made up of a combination of his own self-destructive isolationism and his blunt aggression. In my quarter century as a digital activist working for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, I've had cause to work in more than 30 countries. And wherever I went, I would meet policymakers and talk with them about the rules that they should be thinking about in order to make the technology work better in their own countries. And every single time, these meetings would end with them politely agreeing with me that yes, the rules should be better, but they would insist that making any kind of rules that would improve technology was impossible because the US trade representative would kick in their teeth if they tried. Because for all of this century, the US trade rep has been one of the greatest global impediments to a better world. The US trade rep hopped from country to country, demanding policies to protect American tech firms from foreign competitors, especially the kind of competitor who would improve those American tech products that we all use in order to protect users' privacy, their consumer rights, and their labor rights while we used American products. The most glaring example of a policy that the US trade representative shoved down the world's throat is something called anti-circumvention law. Under anti-circumvention law, it's illegal to modify any kind of technology that has any kind of anti-modification defense. If a programmer draws a kind of virtual chalk-dotted line around some of the code in a device or a product, and they add a label to it that says, do not look inside this box, do not change what's inside this box, then it becomes illegal to do so, even if you're trying to do something that would otherwise be legal. That means that if your printer is designed to reject generic ink, you can't put new code in it that verifies the ink cartridge and tricks the printer into using your generic ink. Now, the European Parliament, the Spanish legislature, they never passed a law that says you have to buy your ink from the company that sold you your printer. But if HP adds any kind of anti-modification measure to the code that checks your ink, then disabling that code becomes a serious crime. Now, laws like this are obviously an invitation to mischief. These laws are used to prevent the independent repair of everything from tractors to cars, to phones, to game consoles, to ventilators at hospitals. They're used to stop you from blocking ads and surveillance on your phone and your smart TV, which means that, and they keep you locked into the manufacturer's app stores, their payment systems, and the other add-ons to their core offerings, which means that you're always being ripped off with junk fees, that you can't install software of your choosing, including software like IceBlock, an app that Apple has blocked in America, an app that warns you when Donald Trump's masked thugs are in your neighborhood, kidnapping people and sending them to camps. The US passed the first of these anti-circumvention laws in 1998, when Bill Clinton signed the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And as the ink was still drying on Clinton's signature, the US trade rep began to race around the world, demanding that America's trading partners adopt their own versions of this law. And as these laws were adopted around the world, American tech giants were given carte blanche to extract money and data from the world's users. Now, American users got ripped off too. Of course, they were the first victims of big tech. But at least in America, the stock market benefited from the ripoffs of these American tech companies. If you were one of America's trading partners, anti-circumvention was a losing proposition. Your people were being ripped off for their data and for their money, and your tech companies couldn't go into business selling the products that would disenshittify America's cash and data extraction machines. So, why did America's trading partners agree to anti-circumvention laws? Well, it was all thanks to the tender ministrations of that US trade representative. Countries that didn't pass anti-circumvention law were threatened with tariffs by the United States. Now, I used to occasionally guest lecture at an international relations graduate program at the Central European University when it was still in Budapest. And one summer, one of my students had been the information minister to a Central American country. And they told me the story about how when their country was negotiating the Central American Free Trade Agreement, or CAFTA, with the United States, that their own trade representative had phoned them up and said, look, I know you told us, do not budge on anti-circumvention. But the US trade rep says that unless we give them anti-circumvention, they will not take our agricultural exports. I'm sorry, we're going to have to take it. And so country by country, countries around the world fell into line. Now, when someone tells you, you'd better do as I say, or I will burn your house down, and then you do what they say, and then they burn your house down anyway, you are an absolute sucker if you keep doing what they told you to do. I find it absolutely bizarre that the US trade representative spent decades racing around the world, getting every country in the world to sign up to this America First policy with threats of tariffs. And then Trump, he imposed the tariffs anyways, which has opened up the space for every country in the world to get rid of these America First policies and begin the long overdue journey to a post-American internet. Now, of course, that isn't all Trump has done. He has also made it abundantly clear that he considers what used to be called America's trading partners and allies to be America's rivals on the geopolitical stage, and that US tech is one of the primary weapons that he is going to use to wage war on the world. I'm speaking to you today from Canada, where I was born and raised. I'm in my father's office at my parents' house in Toronto. And here in Canada, the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, has caved in on a plan to tax big tech, which means that American companies will be able to go on cheating on their taxes in Canada, but Canadian companies won't be able to cheat on them. And that means that Canadian companies will forever be at a disadvantage. Over there where you are in the European Union, Trump has ordered the EU to scrap its new tech antitrust laws, the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act, which aim to open space for European competitors to American tech companies. But more than that, Trump and the US tech companies have teamed up to attack and deplatform public officials that Trump disagrees with. Take Karim Khan, the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Khan swore out a criminal complaint and arrest warrant for the genocidaire Benjamin Netanyahu, and Trump railed against Khan. Then Microsoft obliged Trump by cutting off Khan's access to his online accounts, nuking his email, his calendar, his address book, and all the working files of the International Criminal Court. For officials all over the world, this message could not be clearer. Trump sees you as his enemy, and he will use American tech companies to cut you off at the knees if you do not roll over for Trump. Well, the response to this has been something called the Eurostack. It's an initiative from the EU that seeks to fund and deploy open source European-hosted platforms that the European public, the European businesses, and European governments are currently locked into. Thus far, the Eurostack's focus has been building those made-in-the-EU alternatives to US tech stack and on financing the data centers that they'll run in. But very shortly, Eurostack advocates are going to hit a wall. Escaping from American big tech isn't merely a matter of having another service that you can move your data and your interactions to. You also have to have a way to transition from the old American service to the new Eurostack equivalent. No government ministry, no business, no individual is going to manually copy and paste thousands or even millions of documents out of Microsoft, Apple, or Google's cloud and into the Eurostack. No one is going to individually move those edit histories, those email chains, and those file permissions over. Those files and data structures, they are essential to the people who created them, and they often contain sensitive information and compliance data that they are legally not allowed to delete or alter. Sure, the European Union could try to order American big tech companies to create those export tools so that Europeans can easily retrieve their data in formats that can be faithfully imported into Eurostack services. But we can already see how that is going to play out. Last year's Digital Markets Act contains a modest set of interoperability requirements that require American tech companies like Apple to open up their platforms to rival app stores and payment processors. Now, Apple's monopoly over iPhones is a big deal. It lets the company structure the market for software in Europe without any accountability, without any limits, and Apple gets to extract a 30% app tax on every euro that changes hands via an app on an iPhone. Globally, Apple makes more than $100 billion a year from this app tax. Now, when the EU passed a law aimed at halting this racket, Apple went crazy. First, they proposed a solution to this that was so onerous and tortured that it was kind of a sick joke, where anyone who used a payment processor other than Apple's would have to pay fees that added up to more than 30%. And if their phone was believed to have left the European Union for more than 20 days, Apple would delete all of their apps and their data. Now, when that became obvious that that wasn't going to fly with the EU, Apple then threatened to stop selling iPhones and iPads in Europe. And now Apple has filed 18 spurious legal challenges to any interoperability mandate in the DMA, hoping to drag this out for a decade, the way Facebook did with the GDPR. If this is how an American tech company responds to a small potatoes order to give Europeans more choice over how they use their own devices and their own data, imagine what these American giants will do if the European Union orders them to open up their platforms so people can leave altogether. The only plausible path from US big tech to the Eurostack runs straight through anti-circumvention law. The EU must repeal Article 6 of the Copyright Directive, the law that it passed at the behest of the US Trade Representative, which protects the rent extraction tactics of American tech companies. We need to make it legal for European technologists to reverse engineer the American tech platforms' websites and their apps so that Europeans can get their data out of America's tech silos and into open, sovereign, privacy-respecting, consumer rights-preserving, worker-protecting Eurostack versions. Building the Eurostack without thinking about migration tools, it's a recipe for disaster. It's like building housing for people in East Germany in West Berlin, without sparing a thought for how those East Germans are going to get to that new apartment block. Eventually, you have to tear down the wall. The good news is there is no reason to keep Article 6 of the Copyright Directive on the books. That law has always been a wreck. It's one of the primary barriers to right to repair. Companies now build devices with access controls on their parts so that even after you install a part into a device, it won't start working until the manufacturer's representative unlocks it and charges you a hefty fee. Under anti-circumvention laws like Article 6 of the Copyright Directive, it is illegal to bypass these locks. The digital locks that the European Union Copyright Directive protects, they're almost all found in American products. There's only a handful of European manufacturers who rely on them, and every one of them is doing something bad. Volkswagen used the fact that it was illegal to reverse engineer and audit its engines to disguise the fact that they were cheating on their emission tests, and the resulting Dieselgate scandal killed thousands of Europeans. Then there's Nuvog, a train manufacturer in Poland, which has booby-trapped all the trains that they sell. When the locomotives sense that they have been parked in a competitor's train yard for maintenance, the locomotive renders itself inoperable, and then Nuvog charges tens of thousands of euros to remotely repair the locomotive. Now, when this was revealed by a team of independent security researchers, Nuvog threatened them under Article 6 of the Copyright Directive because it is illegal to report on how these software locks work. Mercedes won't let you unlock your car's full acceleration capability unless you pay them a monthly subscription fee, and any mechanic who unlocks your accelerator pedal without Mercedes' permission violates Article 6 of the Copyright Directive. In Ireland, there's a company called Medtronic that blocks independent repair of their ventilators, and they make the majority of ventilators in the world. And so during the lockdown, when hospitals all over the world were trying to keep their ventilators running, they were failing because no one from Medtronic could fly to the hospital and type an unlock code into the keyboard so that the repair the hospital's own technician made would start working. Any business that relies on anti-circumvention is garbage, and we should kill it with fire. The global champions of this legal sabotage are all American, but the EU companies that created their businesses around this, they are also trash, and the EU should be putting them out of business with extreme prejudice. It's remarkable that we've forgotten about the kind of reverse engineering that Article 6 of the Copy Directive bans. It used to be pretty normal. Providing tools to move data from one system to another without permission from the old vendor, that is a completely legitimate technological activity. The only reason that we forgot that this stuff existed is that the US trade representatives spent 25 years lobotomizing all of us, threatening us with tariffs unless we dared to do, if we ever dared to do anything that disrupted American big tech. With those American companies, it is always disruption for thee, but never for me. In just a few short months, Trump has sown the seeds of the destruction of the world's most pernicious America First system. Now it is in the EU's power to send it to its long overdue grave. It is time to start moving fast and breaking kings. Thank you.
¿Alguna pregunta para Cory? Sí.
Thank you, Cory. And just two things. First, what are three things we should do as users? And second, regarding certification, how do I convince my friends that privacy is important and that they should Google their lives when they tell me it just works and it would be so much work to change when they have nothing to hide?
1 second, we get some more. There is
Okay.
anything.
I'm going to take some notes then.
Yes, please. També en català o en castellà i traduïm, O sigui,
Hi, Cory. It's a pleasure to be able to hear you here. I wanted to ask you about, you talked, of course, about interoperability, how important it is, and it is effectively a part of the Digital Markets Act. But for instance, where it has been imposed, for instance, in messaging services, for instance, on WhatsApp, for instance, as a monopoly service, it has not worked in the practice because other services are not willing to connect to it because, for instance, for services like Signal, it may entail a security risk, right? So how do we approach these situations where interoperability is recognized theoretically, but at the end it cannot be fulfilled? So that's a bit my question. Thank you.
Preguntes, més preguntes, més? Doncs the floor is yours.
Okay, sure. Let me pull up my notes here. So 3 things you can do. Look, I'm skeptical of things that you can do as an individual. Obviously, like, you can make some consumption choices that will make your life better. You know, you can, if you think Twitter's bad for your mental health, then by all means go to Mastodon or Blue Sky or both of them. It's fine. If you don't like your closed laptop that you can't fix, you can get a framework. If you don't like the search results on Google, you can switch to kagi.com. The thing is that none of that is going to make a structural difference, right? You can't really vote with your wallet. The reason billionaires want you to vote with your wallet is their wallets are so much thicker than yours that they know that they're always going to win that vote. And so the only way to really make a change is to be part of a structural movement. So that's things like Xnet and all of the EDRI members, depending on where you live in Europe. There's, Digital Rights Ireland, the Open Rights Group in the UK, CCC in Germany, Bits of Freedom in the Netherlands, and so on and so on. It's only by getting involved with those groups, and of course the Electronic Frontier Foundation, that you make a structural difference. And it's hard, right? Other people are a pain in the ass. I'm the first to admit it. I am a hermit. I spend most of my time in a hammock in my backyard writing and not speaking to anyone. I get why it's hard to try and do that work, but it pays very big dividends, because when you form solidaristic relationships through labor unions, through regional groups and political groups, you have a bond of solidarity that serves you well, not just in these individual policy fights that you get involved with, but in the coming disruption and terror we have from rising fascism. The opposite of fascism is solidarity. There's a reason that the first group that fascists attack is always organized labor, because that solidarity is the thing that threatens fascism and authoritarianism the most. So it's a lot harder than doing 3 things right now. But don't worry about doing the 3 things right now if they're time consuming. Save up all that time and do one big thing. Get involved structurally with groups working for systemic change, not for individual change. As to what you tell your friends when you're trying to de-Google them and they say they have nothing to hide, on the one hand, like, it's the problems of de-Googling are not just about ganas, right? They're not just about willpower. They're about the difficulty. They're about the friction. They're about the switching costs. And that has to do with the difficulty of moving data and data structures, complex forms of data, from one platform to another. So if we make it easier to de-Google, which again is a structural matter because that reverse engineering is currently illegal under European IP laws, if we make it easier to move, then it'll be easier to convince them, right? It's much harder to convince people to switch when that's a lot of work than when it's a little work. But as to the risks of privacy, I mean, there's so many of them. Here in America, well, in America where I live most of the time, I'm not in America today, the hospitals really want to hire nurses not as staff but as contractors, because that's how they avoid unions, because contractors aren't unionized. And it used to be that when you hired a nurse as a contractor, you went through a regional staffing agency, and there'd be 2 or 3 in every city that would have many nurses on their books. But these days, there's 4 apps. They're all national. They all advertise themselves as Uber for nursing. And all of these apps, because we don't have any privacy law in this country, in America, they haven't updated privacy law since the 1980s. All of these apps are able to buy the nurses' credit history before they offer them a shift. And the more credit card debt a nurse is carrying, to lower the wage they're offered for their work. Now, there are 100 ways in which you might be being charged more or paid less. So this is coming straight out of your pocketbook. It's not just about the kind of Anne Frank scenario where fascism returns and they go to the city records office and they find out where all the people they want to round up live, although that is a thing that you should be worried about. I'm telling you this as someone who lives in America. That is a thing you should really be worried about. But it's also about your pocketbook. It's about whether you're going to get charged more or paid less because of the private data that is being acquired about you and then sold to anyone who wants to buy it. On the question of interoperability, WhatsApp and the DMA, I think it was a mistake to start with end-to-end encrypted messaging for interoperability. I think it was actually a terrible mistake. And that's for several reasons. One is that users don't seem to struggle very much with having multiple messaging tools. You might talk with some friends on WhatsApp and some friends on Signal, and maybe you sometimes forget which is which, but it's not a big deal. And adding Signal, if all your friends are on WhatsApp, but you have that one friend on Signal, it's not that hard. By contrast, social media has an enormous gravity on the users who use it. It can be very hard to leave social media, and social media takes up a lot of time depending on how involved you are with a platform. So, you know, if you're on Facebook because that's where the people who have the same rare disease as you are hanging out, or because that's how you stay in touch with the people you left behind when you left another country, or because that's where your customers or your audience is, or because that's how you organize the carpool to drop your kids off at the football game, then it can be really hard to go, because you don't just have to convince your friends to go, you have to convince all those other people who your friends are stuck to leave. And so opening up the space for people to leave a social media platform and go to another one, but continue to see the messages and participate in the communities that were happening on the old one. And we can do that through an interoperability mandate. We could do that through something like on-device bridging, where you keep the Facebook client on your phone in a sandbox, and then you have an automated process that checks Facebook every 10 minutes and grabs everything waiting for you and sticks them in your Blue Sky feed or in your Mastodon feed so you can reply to them there, or maybe some mix of that, or maybe something else, scraping and bots and so on. If we do that, we can make it much easier for people to go. The other problem, of course, with end-to-end encrypted messaging is chat control. Since the 1990s, European and American governments have been trying to ban end-to-end encrypted messaging. And so to have these governments now say to the people who have effective end-to-end encrypted messaging, well, you're going to have to do this thing that might break or weaken the encryption, but we're not doing that because we want to break encrypted messaging. Never mind that we're doing chat control and we are trying to break encrypted messaging. This is not about breaking encrypted messaging. Creates a huge credibility gap. It was such a tactical mistake to start with this. I really hope that the Commission understands that mistake and moves on quickly to social media, because that's the big fish to fry. It just shouldn't matter which social media platform you're on. What should matter is which people you want to talk to. When you switch from Vodafone to T-Mobile, nobody has to care, right? Your phone number just comes along with it. You know, you've never called up a friend and said, dude, you will never believe whose SIM is in my phone today. It just doesn't matter. And it shouldn't matter if you're on Twitter or Facebook or Blue Sky or which Mastodon server you're on. You should be able to talk to the people who want to talk to you and that you want to talk to.
Thank you, Cory. More question, preguntes, alguna cosa? No, doncs...
Pues,
Thank you very
entonces,
much, Cory. We are so
muchísimas
happy to
gracias.
have you here. It was great.
Ya
Thank you
lo
so
siento.
much.
La próxima vez yo voy a ir a la España.
Como lo dice siempre y mientes. Ok,
Okay.
chao.
Okay. Muchísimas gracias. ¿Tiene un bien cena y cócteles ahora, pienso? Y buenas noches.
Buenas noches, chao.
Chao.